Hey guys, this is Jeff from Indigo Silver and the Shoot Space, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit today about a little bit of retouching and your digital workflow. In this month's article is the digital edition, so we wanted to really tackle some of the things that we hear over and over again when we're mentoring other photographers, in that their retouching is simply just taking way too long. And don't forget, time is money. And a lot of the articles that we've talked about, Lori has mentioned that your production time absolutely ties into what you have to pay or charge for your retail products. And so time and time again, we're hearing a photographer spending 30 minutes to an hour retouching basic simple portraits using frequency separation and other techniques that are amazing. Don't get me wrong, frequency separation is great, in certain circumstances. But in the average portrait that you're going to be delivering to most clients, frequency separation isn't necessarily necessary. So, we're going to be holding a class at Shutterfest called, what's it called, Lori? The 5-minute retouch or something like that. Can't remember exactly what it's called, but basically it's efficiency in your retouching. Here in our studio, the average amount of time that I'm spending retouching a photo is generally less than 10 minutes. Now, again, you guys that are commercial, editorial, fashion photographers are probably cringing right now, but that's not what I do. Lori and I here in our studio are basic wedding and portrait photographers. So there's definitely a need for more advanced editing if you're doing signature edits or if you're doing any kind of sky swaps or composites. There's obviously going to be more time spent in that. So not really comparing apples to apples if we're talking about those types of techniques. Today's kind of video is going to be discussing what you guys should be doing if you're doing average everyday portraits that you're working with your wedding and portrait clients. And so today I'm going to run through a couple of editing techniques that I use. I've got 2 images. I've got one pulled up from a wedding and that I've shot on location on a wedding day, and then I've got one that is a studio headshot. And so I'm going to show you pretty much in real time how we edit those. And the techniques that I'm using today are the same techniques that I'm using if I'm printing 30 by 40, 40 by 60 wall portraits for our clients. So they look really, really good. And again, if these were commercial or editorial photos, I might go a little bit further. But for the purpose of today's talk, I just want to get you streamlined in your production labor, and maybe help you understand that you don't need to spend 30 minutes or an hour on every photo, especially if they haven't already purchased that photo. And so let me take a step back really quick before I start editing this photo and talk about workflow. Back in the days of film, dirty 4-letter word starts with an F, I know. Photographers would go and they would photograph their session, and they only had a limited number of frames. So they would either shoot 12, 36, those increments of film at their session. They would take those rolls of film, they would send it off to the lab, and that lab would process those images, and they would send them back proofs. That's what the client saw. Basic proofs. No Photoshop, no retouching, anything. Just basic color corrected, exposure, basic processing. The basic stuff that we're going to do in Lightroom is what the client saw back in the day of film. And a lot of new film photographers are doing the same thing. They're sending those images off, and they're having them processed and sent back as 4x5 or 4x6 proofs. And so what photographers did back in the film days is they would meet with their clients and they would show their clients these proofs that have had no Photoshop. Clients would choose their files, their images that they wanted, and then the photographer would then scan that photo in and bring it into Photoshop and do any retouching that needed to be done to it. Fast forward 10, 15 years, now we're in the digital age, and a lot of photographers feel like, you need to go through and retouch all 50 images in a portrait session, or go through and retouch hundreds of images from a wedding before your client ever sees them. And that's just wasting money, because in the average portrait session, keep in mind, if you show your clients 40, 50 images, the average portrait session might buy a third of those in some sort of book, wall portrait, or product that they're going to take home and print. If you're not doing in-person sales and you're just giving digital images, that's a great time to be thinking about giving them Lightroom edit photos only, and then transitioning them into print by saying anything that you order in a printed product, we are then going to fully retouch that and make sure it looks the best it can when it's hanging on your wall or displayed in your home. So Lori and I kind of still, subscribe to that kind of theory of, when we work with clients, the only thing they ever see is Lightroom edits. And for our wedding clients, anything that they receive on the wedding day, not only is it only printable to 8x10, but we also don't retouch anything. It's Lightroom edits only. And so, you know, part of what we do is we strive to be a better artist, so we get it right in camera. I know you see a lot of guys talking about get it right in camera. We are 100% get it right in camera, so we don't have to do a lot on the back end. So when we do those basic adjustments in the basic panel of Lightroom, they look pretty darn good. And then when we do need to retouch something for a print product or an album or a wall portrait, then it even looks better. And so I highly encourage you guys to start, you know, picking up this method, because there's no sense in staying up to all hours of night editing and photoshopping images that your client may or may not ever even print if you're not doing in-person sales. And if you are doing in-person sales, maybe they don't choose it. Maybe they think their butt looks big. I don't know. I mean, I thought my butt looked big. It's generally my belly, but I generally think I don't like some photos of me. And so if a photographer spent time to edit that, they've wasted their time, because I'm never going to buy it in a printed product if I don't like it. So, so just think about that as we're going forward, and let's watch some of these techniques that I'm going to show you today, and think about how you might be able to incorporate these into your workflow to make you more efficient and yet, and at the same time, more profitable. So I'm going to switch over right now so you can see my screen, and we are going to look at an image. This image was just shot last week, actually this past Saturday. Evolve actually still has my images. They're still processing my images, so I don't even have these back from Evolve yet. So this is a brand new wedding. Again, you know, this is straight out of camera. This has had absolutely no editing done to it whatsoever. So I'm going to walk you through my basic workflow in how I process images from Lightroom into Photoshop, and I'm going to do this as if it were a wall portrait. So this image will be fully retouched as if it were a wall portrait. So the first thing I want to do when I come into Lightroom is jump over into my develop panel, and I'm going to get rid of these JPEGs down here at the bottom, this film strip, and the first thing I want to do is just grab a white balance. And so I'm going to pick somewhere. His suit was blue, so it's probably going to be too warm, but it looks okay. It was more of a grayish, like a slate blue. I'm going to try her dress here. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to bump the warmth just a little bit more, just for my taste, see if I like it. I'm going to bring my contrast down just a bit. Personally, I don't like a lot of contrasty images. I'm going to bring my highlights down to really bring back the detail in her gown. I'm going to pull the shadows down just a bit, pull my whites down just a little bit more, and I'm going to bump my clarity. And at this point, this is pretty much what the client is going to see, and this is what they're going to receive on their flash drive and in their digital gallery. This to me is a proof. This is all that happened back in the days of film. When a photographer would send their film off, they would process that image to make sure that everything, color, clarity, the contrast, and everything was right to that photographer's taste and liking, and they would send it back. Now, let's fast forward and let's pretend that this client actually purchased a wall portrait or an album, and this image needed to be retouched. Of course, the groom has a little bit of scarring on his forehead. There's some lines underneath his eyes. Bride looks pretty darn phenomenal. There's some veins in her hands that women hate, so I'll probably address those a little bit. There's a little bit of marks on the bench down here that I'm going to take care of, but I'm going to retouch this image as if it were going to be in a wedding album or a wall portrait. And so from Lightroom, I'm just going to do Control-E, and I am going to open this up into Photoshop. So now we have this opened in Photoshop, and the first thing that I do when I bring it into Photoshop is there's a handy little software that you can buy called Portraiture. There's a lot of them. We use the one from Imaginomic called Portraiture. There's also Portrait Professional. We're not affiliated with these guys. It's just something that we use here in our studio, and we like it. It makes our job a little bit easier. But basically what Portraiture does is it's going to look at the skin tones, and it's just going to help soften and even out those skin tones from highlights and shadows and things like that. And it's super easy to use. So I'm just going to click Portraiture here. I'm going to drag this over a little bit. It always opens up in the middle of my monitor so you can see it. But Portraiture is as easy to use. And I don't go, I mean, I'm sure there are people that go way more into detail in using Portraiture, but I keep things simple. To me, time is money, and I like keeping things very, very swift and very efficient. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab this one, this little eyedropper, and I'm going to put it on an area of light skin, and I'm going to grab this one, and I'm going to put it on an area of a little bit of shadowed or darker skin. And then down here in the bottom corner, you can see it's picked out my mask of just my skin tones right here. And that's what I'm looking for. So basically, I'm going to use those two pointers. I'm going to pull out an area of highlight and an area of shadow. Over in the side, you've got some presets up here in the top left corner that you can choose. The one that I use is just basically +3, 4, and 6 with 18 on the threshold. I've found that that works pretty well. I've got my sharpness bumped up because this does soften the image just a little bit, so I got +1 on my sharpness, and then I just hit OK. Now, the best thing about portraiture, guys, is it's a Lightroom plugin as well as a Photoshop plugin. So for portrait sessions, the first thing I do after I cull and process my images is I batch. Control A, select everything in my film strip, right click, edit in portraiture, and exactly what you just saw me do right there, I do it to the first image and it batches it on every image in that set. And so that is 90% of my retouching done right there. And already I can see that the skin tones in here are a lot more smooth. If I zoom in, they're a lot more smooth than what they were. So if I do a before and after, if I hit edit, step backwards over here, now you can see all these shadows and highlight areas underneath the groom's eyes right here. Everything just smooths out just a little bit. And so that is 90% of what I'm going to do. And so then I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more, and I see he's got some scarring up here. And so the next thing I'm going to do is just grab my patch tool, and I'm just going to move my patch tool just to remove some of those bigger scarring underneath there. This line's up underneath the eye. I'm going to patch those. And then with lines underneath the eye, I don't want to take them completely out and make him look like he's 12. So I've got an action built that is fade 50%. And when I press my F2 key, it will fade that line or that blemish back in at a 50% opacity. So just to show you an example of what that would look like, if I wanted to take out his whole eye here, obviously that doesn't look right. But when I press F2, it fades it back in at 50%. Now that's not what we want, so I'm just going to step backwards and get out of that. And then I'm going to show you how I built that action. So in order to fade your patch tool 50%, so you bring back a little bit of those lines, because again, we don't want to over retouch people and make them look like someone they're not. What we're going to do is we're going to just select our area, we're going to drag it somewhere, and then up here at the top, we're going to do Edit, Fade Patch Selection, drag this down to around 50% and hit OK. And you can record an action to that. And so if you don't know how to record actions, I'm sure there's some great YouTube videos out there to show you how to record actions, but it's easy to record an action and just assign it to a function key, which is what I do. So anytime I patch something, I'm going to hit the F2 key and it's going to fade it back in at 50%. So again, I'm going to come right under here in this little harsh line and these little lines right up under her eye. I'm going to hit F2, fade that back in. Down here, I'm going to zoom back out just a bit, and then down here on the bench, there's a little bit of trash and stuff on the bench. So again, I'm just going to circle these, and you can either use your patch tool or you can use your spot healing tool. So either which one you want to use, the patch tool or the spot healing tool, and I'm actually still selected there. So the patch tool or the spot healing tool, you can use either one. They both work pretty good just to get all this little junk out, because in a 30x40 or one of our albums that has a fine art printing process, even all these little teeny places right here will show up and they will look like specks of dust on the album. So I'm just going to come in here and clean all that stuff up right there. Other than that, what I may do with this one is run Nik software. And I believe I lost my little Nik palette that's floating around here somewhere when I went into record mode. But sometimes I will actually come in and run Nik. I think I can get to it from here. The Nik selective tool, I can bring it up, and it should be opening it right now. Right about now. All right, where did it go? Why is it not opening up my selective tool? Oh, there it is. Okay, lost it. Here it is. It jumped over to the side. So with the Nik selective tool, I've got a couple of things. One of my favorite that I've got in here is called this tonal contrast. So I can click tonal contrast, and now it's going to open up another window for me here, and it's going to bring that image in. And tonal contrast will allow me to really just kind of dial in all this detail in her gown. So let me see if I can do a before and after of this. So so here you can see it going back and forth. So see how it just pops all that detail out. But to me, I think it's too much if it's on all this foreground stuff over here. So basically all I'm going to do is hit OK. I'm going to hit the brush button down here, and now it's going to apply it. But it's going to apply it onto another layer here in Photoshop. And so if you see down at the bottom, this nick layer is down here. The mask is set to black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint on over here with a white brush, and anywhere I paint is going to apply that that effect. And let me put my opacity on my brush up. So anywhere I paint is going to apply that that effect, which on her dress and on her gown is really gonna, and her veil is really gonna bring out some of the detail there. And now, you know, you guys may not be able to see this in the video, but on my end, it's really kind of popping out some of that detail right there. So I'm gonna hit apply, and now it's applied that painter effect to the dress right here, the detail in the dress and the gown. So from there, guys, to me, that's pretty much what I'm gonna do for the majority of wall portraits for our clients. You know, I could obviously go in here and do a little bit of dodging and burning. So I've got a little action here called non-destructive dodge and burn. So I can bring that over and flip it into white, bring my opacity down to like 7%. And if I wanted their skin tones to pop just a little bit more and just pop out some of those highlights in here, I could do that. And then I could simply just flip my brush over to black and now come in here and just paint down some of this background over here. I could always do that and just darken that up. But for the most part, I think this image looks pretty good, and it's ready to be printed in a wall portrait for my standards. So that's one thing that I would do with a wedding portrait. Now, from there, I would simply save that. It would go back into Lightroom, and it would stack with my original photo, so that way I can still track it. But since I haven't got my edits back from Evolve, I'm just going to close this window, and I'm just not going to save those, and we're going to go into a studio portrait. So this studio portrait has a little bit more going on than my couple that I just had, because as you can tell, those guys look like they just stepped out of a magazine. Really made my my day hard. And not that this client is hard to look at, she's really pretty, but when you shoot in studio, sometimes you get things like glare on the skin. You get that vein popping out in the middle of the head. Anytime I've got like a background light, sometimes I'll get some of those stray hairs back here and things like that. So again, really simple process. The first thing I'm going to do again is run portraiture. I'm going to go over here, run portraiture. And it's just as simple. As soon as this portraiture window opens up, it's already remembered all my settings. I just click OK. So once you've got those settings open, set in there for your preferences, it's going to remember it. So it's going to pop in, and it's going to just do a basic soften on my skin. From there, I'm going to come in with some of those fine lines that she's got on her forehead here. I'm going to go over to my patch tool, and I'm just going to circle out some of those really fine lines on the forehead, and I'm going to fade those back in at 50%, because remember, we don't want her looking 12. You know, she is an adult. We don't really want her looking like a kid. So I like fading these lines back in at about 50%. Now, she does have quite a bit of glare on her forehead there, so there's a couple of things I can do to take care of that glare. One thing that I can do is just circle this entire area, and sometimes this works, and professional retouchers, you know, the guys that are going to do it for a living are going to cringe when they see me do this, but sometimes it works, sometimes it don't, depending on how much texture their skin has in it. But I'll simply just drag it to my background, because the patch tool only looks at texture, doesn't look at skin tones or anything like that. It just looks at the texture. So when I drag it over to the background and then I hit F2, it looks pretty darn good, you know, if I'm shooting on like a regular background, like a solid background. Obviously, if you've got trees and stuff in the background, that will not work. But, you know, sometimes here in studio, I'll cheat a little bit and I'll do that. And so some of these glare that's on her nose here, now I've got a clean area of skin that I can work for. She's got some dry skin right here on her nose that I'm going to remove. So I'm just going to go in and patch out all that little dry skin, come underneath here. I'm just going to grab this big section here, drag it up to that clean, what I call clean skin. And again, it takes down some of the shine and a little bit of those wrinkles. And just simple, you know, simple retouching that's not overcomplicated and not something that I'm going to spend an hour on, you know, for something that, you know, for especially something like a headshot. You know, I'm just looking to get it to look good. And even for something like this one, I mean, I would even print this one in a wall portrait. So there, I've cleaned up the skin just that quick. I've got the skin cleaned up and looking pretty good here. So now I'm going to tackle some of these stray hairs. Now, Sometimes when I'm photographing in studio, I'll use background light, just put a little separation there, and it really creates a pain in the ass for me, because now I've got a gradient from highlight to shadow going out here, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to remove these hairs. But again, I go for simplicity. The first thing I'm going to do is just grab my clone tool, and I'm going to open this up a little bit bigger. I'm going to put my opacity down to about 50%, select an area out here, and I'm just going to start painting those away. I don't want to go too hard, and I've got a soft edge brush, because I don't want to go too hard on the edge, because then you're going to see it. You're going to see that hard edge right along the hair. It's not going to look natural. And so that side was pretty easy getting rid of those because we didn't have that gradient. But over here you'll see, you're going to see a little bit more right here as I'm starting to take that out, and it becomes a little bit more difficult. And so again, you know, people can spend hours, you know, sitting here retouching out stray hairs, but I can tell you that I've been doing this for about 15 years, and for an average headshot client, they are not going to notice that I only spent about 3 minutes retouching out those stray hairs that are flying out. No one ever notices it, and I think what a lot of photographers really get caught up on is the minutia, just going in and just trying to overcomplicate things and making it too perfect, you know. And so to me, this is approaching a deliverable headshot file. I've got a little bit of that that gradient where you could see my brush mark down here, so I'm going to clean that up just a little bit. But to me, you know, that is pretty much a deliverable headshot. I'll come down here and clean up some of this. That is the hairs that are flying out onto her blue shirt here. Clean a little bit of those up so that way it looks pretty good. But for me, you know, in the little bit of time that I spent on that, considering the headshots is a commodity, I think that that looks pretty good from a before and after you know, scenario. And I think I can press the Alt key and turn the edit on and off. Lori, what do I press and press the eyeball to turn this on and off of Photoshop to show my before and after?
Alt.
Alt. Alt eyeball. Alt eyeball. It's not working.
Which eyeball are you clicking?
On the next to my layer mask. Sorry.
Next to your layer mask?
Right over here.
No, just go down to your background layer.
Okay. Apparently I don't edit things the way Lori does, so because I didn't do it on layers, but maybe I just need to unlock it.
Then the Alt is not going to do anything.
Okay, then Alt won't do anything. Anyway, because I don't edit on layers, I do things quick and dirty. Lori will have like 37 layers over here, which is probably the way you should do it, but that's why I'm in charge of all our editing and stuff, because she takes way too long. Love you, babe. All right. That's why I do the 5-minute edit, because it's 95%. You know, someone once said that that you can spend 5 minutes getting something to 95%, but you'll spend another hour getting it to a 100, and the average person other than you is not going to notice the difference. And so I live by that rule. I live by the rule that done is better than perfect. Again, we've never had any clients complain about retouching. If anything, sometimes we've had some people come back and say they look over retouched, and so that's very, very few and far between. But just keep in mind, and let me switch this back over here. So just keep in mind when you are doing your edits, you know, time is money, and the longer you spend editing an image, the less money you're making when you sell that image because of that production labor. And time again, like we said in the article, we will hear people say, oh, well, I don't need to charge for my time because I'm just doing it at night when my kids are asleep or when they're having a nap or something like that. But if you ever want to be profitable in your business, you have to start billing for that time now, so that way when you do get to the point that you're busy and you're looking to hire someone, you have that money already built into your pricing and your workflow. So I hope that was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us, and we will see you guys at Shutterfest in April. See you later.